Well, here we are, Volume 4. This is a historic volume for me, as it was after Volume 4 that I went in to fix the whole show and dedicated myself to helping RWBY find its legs. So, in part, it's thanks to Volume 4 that I'm doing what I'm doing today. It's the first volume to show me in how many ways that RWBY can be actually good. This isn't to say that it didn't have its own problems, mind you, but it's probably one of the best volumes in the entire show, and I hope that with what changes I made, I've only increased the quality it already brings to the table. But let's not waste time reminiscing. A shout out to all the sketchy huntsmen who have been invaluable in aiding me in this volume. I mean, we've increased our ranks to about 30 artists in total, and they've done some incredible work this volume. I am so eager to show you guys what they have put into this project. A shout out to FamtanFalling for giving me the writing feedback that I sorely need. Trust me, there was some great back and forth between me and him this volume. And to you, the audience, for keeping me powered throughout all of this. I really couldn't do it without you guys, and I look forward to hearing your reactions to this volume and your feedback, your criticisms. I really am eager to hear them. So, now, without much further ado, kanpai, everyone! Now, a few house cleaning matters. First things first, we're upping the number of episodes this season from 20 to 22. Why this change? It's a slightly longer story that needs that extra time. I'm pretty sure with the successes of volumes 1 through 3, we could probably leverage a longer development period to make everything work, especially with the switch to Maya. Second is character design. After much deliberation and discussion, I basically made the call that the character designs in volume 4 were only okay. Nothing quite matching the quality of Volume 1 or Volume 2's alternate outfits. So I pitched to the sketchy huntsman for alternate outfits that more or less suit the needs of the story and characters. Here's our brief breakdown of who's wearing what now. First up is our dear RWBY, who has been given a more modest outfit that tries to balance her more naive personality with a growing sense of maturity that we'll begin seeing going forward. Among a number of changes such as a modified cape, newly made ammo corset, double frilled skirt, and detached sleeves, you'll find there is absolutely zero boob windows. Because RWBY bought these clothes, she did not raid them from her sister's wardrobe. John himself has been redesigned from the ground up. He starts this volume by ditching his hoodie and replacing it with a gambeson that he wears underneath his traditional armored plates. Though going forward we'll be swapping those out for new armor because of reasons that we'll see in the first few episodes. We'll touch on that with the full art when we finally reach it. Nora and Ren have been given outfits more indicative of their Mistralian origins, with a clear Asian heritage to most of their design. Ren in particular has a more wushu-inspired martial arts outfit, while Nora has splicings of Viking fur. Weiss's new outfit will reflect a more practical mindset as opposed to the dress she wore in the original Volume 4. After suffering the fall of Beacon, she doesn't quite feel comfortable going back to a full civilian garb unless absolutely necessary, so her casual clothing is designed with mobility in mind for emergencies. Blake, meanwhile, has taken an opposite approach. She flees to Menagerie as an escape from a life of combat, and as such has a much more comfortable casual outfit meant for warmer climates. No heavy jacket, and she actually wears a shirt that covers her stomach where she was stabbed. Finally, Yang's outfits in the original were actually pretty good, so much so that her depression outfit, as we've dubbed it inside the Sketchy Huntsman, is completely untouched. Her combat outfit, however, could have used some improvements thanks to the more confusing design ideas like that neck brace thing. The new outfit that we have designed for her will only really get featured at the end of the volume, but it features a jacket inspired by the more English and colonial heritage that Veil seems to stem from. And while I do miss the long coat ends, it also makes much more sense if she keeps a shorter jacket for combat. It's more in her style to not have things tangling her up. The rest of the character designs have been left relatively untouched, and some have been left unmentioned because I felt a reveal would probably suit them better. Now, this has probably been the easiest volume to fix since volume 1, though that doesn't mean I didn't suffer some kind of difficulty in the process. Namely, the nature of hopping back and forth across different periods of time. I've actually sat down and mapped out the story chronologically for each group of characters, so all these events should eventually line up, though if you find a discrepancy of some sort somehow, please let me know and I'll address it in the follow-up video to this series. That goes for all criticisms, comments, and notes. I love hearing from you guys, and sometimes your arguments become the springboard for so many new ideas and angles that I can attack. So please feel free to leave those down below. I would love to see what you guys think of this. Now, let's get to it. Like with the original volume, we're opening on a Grimm crawling its way out of a puddle of ooze. But almost immediately, we're departing from that original scene because this puddle isn't in the land of shadows that Salem lives in. Instead, this puddle is at the base of Beacon Tower, where the Wyvern is still leaking black ichor all the way down to the bottom, despite the fact that it itself is still frozen. And yes, like before, these Grimm are unarmored. One crawls out of the ichor and slinks away as the camera comes into focus on the background, where a newly eye-patched Carden is watching from behind a pillar. Jumping over to him, we get a card overlay telling us it's been 1 month since the fall of Beacon. Bags frame his eyes, or I guess his eye and eye socket in this case. And his armor has clearly seen better days with all the scratches and dents on it. He slips back towards the entrance of the tower. As he passes an alcove, a pair of hands shoot out and pull him in, just in time to avoid a pack of Beowulfs scrambling past the tower. Carden pulls the hand off him and glares at none other than Velvet, who is sporting her slightly shorter ear and an equally tired look. They glare at each other, but go stock still as more Grimm pass by. Once they've moved on, Carden finally asks what Velvet is doing there. She replies that she followed him out of camp after figuring out he's been doing off-the-clock work and pushing himself. She thought he was just being a workaholic, but she didn't realize he was borderline suicidal. She questions what the hell he's doing so close to the tower. Sure, the Grimm are distracted by all the negative emotions on the front lines, but that doesn't mean they're blind. One wrong move and he'll be eaten alive. Carden responds that they're getting nowhere with how slow the perimeter is moving. They retake one building only to lose it the next day. The Wyvern keeps spawning whole hordes, so if someone can take it out, the recovery teams can make more progress. Especially since most of the exchange students like Sage and Scarlet have headed home. Velvet slaps him on the arm, growling that full-fledged huntsmen have tried to take that thing down, and they're the ones that are on the front lines making actual progress. Students, let alone freshmen, have barely been able to hold the defensive perimeter. What does he think he's going to do that they can't? Carden hefts a bag, opening it to reveal what looks to be a cross between red glass and shaped C4 charges. He explains he pulled some family strings to get his hands on enough fire dust to level the tower if he needs to. Velvet remarks, with some trepidation, that he really was going for a suicide mission, to which he rolls his eyes and pulls out a detonator that he says works at a pretty decent range. She shakes her head and asks what happens if all he does is set that thing free. For all they know, keeping that Wyvern up there is the best option they have. They don't even know what turned it to stone in the first place. He just looks at her, clearly exhausted more than just physically, and says that he has to try something. Velvet gives him a solid stare before saying that they have to try something. He's not doing this alone. They share a look, and then he nods, accepting her help. Sneaking into the tower, they arrive at the elevator shaft. There, they find a few of the loose cables still dangling, and they use those to ascend, with Carden in the lead. Time passes as they ascend, slowly, and at one point they have to jump cables because the one they're on can't support their weight anymore, snapping free. Eventually they reach the top, which is still blocked by the mangled mess of an elevator platform that Pyrrha used to ascend during the battle. Seeing a gap between the platform and the shaft, probably left by a previous huntsman who'd come up this way, Carden moves to slide himself and the bag through, only to be attacked by one of those adolescent Beowulfs. He kicks back as more begin to scrabble at the platform and the weight begins to push it free from its janky anchoring. One corner of the platform breaks free and Carden swings the cord back as the still wedged platform tilts to a diagonal position. This allows a small horde of Grimm to start pouring through. They plummet, but they all get passing swipes at Carden and Velvet as they fall, and one of them manages to nick the bag over Carden's shoulder, tearing the strap and causing it to plummet with them. Carden curses, and he and Velvet begin to slide down the rope, dodging this way and that to avoid the rain of Grimm coming after them. They eventually get close to the ground floor, but Carden is tackled by one of the Beowulfs. Thinking quickly, Velvet springs the wire towards the doorway, causing it to scrape the Grim off Carden and land them both inside the tower's lobby. When they roll to a stop, they pause to catch their breath. Carden slams his hand down onto the ground, cursing his luck. Velvet says that he could still detonate it and take the tower down, but he's quick to say that there's a number of reasons that wouldn't work, but the chief one is that the detonator fell with the bag. They look back at the shaft to see another Beowulf fall past them, giving them a comedic little "arf" as it falls by. Figuring that the satchel might as well be buried in Grim at this point, he elects to just retreat and regroup. Velvet is only happy to agree, and the two scamper out of the tower, making a break across the campus. The camera watches them from above as they leave, and it zooms up the entire length of the tower where behind the Wyvern we find a Seer Grim watching them go, as well as overlooking the distant rescue workers, hunters, and salvage teams that are slowly reclaiming the campus. The camera moves in on the Seer as random snips of Pyrrha's voice grow in volume behind it. The scene goes black. As Pyrrha calls Ruby's name, the darkness opens up with Ruby opening her own eyes. We zoom out to find that she has been shaken awake by Nora. Ruby asks if it's time to go, to which Nora simply responds that Ruby was having a nightmare. Ruby gives a quiet little, "Oh," and there's a beat of silence before Nora asks if everything is okay. Ruby says that she's fine, but it's clear that neither of them actually believe her, and they both know it. Ren and John appear bearing food since the team missed breakfast, trying to make sure they weren't late to the train, as this will be the last train to Mistral for the week. Off to the side is a helpful little title informing us that what we're seeing is happening 7 months after the fall of Beacon. Nora laments that they didn't get a chance to try out the hotel's waffle iron, which starts a confused comedic conversation between her and John over whether or not she hates waffles or just likes pancakes more. Ruby accepts a sandwich that Ren hands to her, and he comments that the rest of them have noticed that she hasn't gotten much sleep since they arrived in Himawari, the port town that they're currently in. Ruby returns cheekily that she was in a coma for a couple of months. She's already rested plenty. Ren frowns, but willingly allows her to change the subject when she perks and remarks that he and Nora used to live in Mistral. She asks what it's like, and Ren flinches a little bit, but nods, saying that it's been a while since either of them have been out this way. His face twitches when he says that he's disappointed Lionheart couldn't send any airships to pick them up, quickly adding that the Mistralian countryside is particularly beautiful this time of year and trains aren't nearly as scenic. Nora, catching on to the tail end of the conversation from her own with John, remarks, "What do you mean? It's plenty scenic from the trains. Heck, we've never even been on an airship out here." Before John or Ruby can ask a follow-up question about Ren's weird comments, they're cut off by screaming coming from down the platform. A pack of Beringals have leaped the defensive wall around the town and are rampaging their way down the track. While the other three have just barely started reacting to the sudden attack, Ruby has already jumped out of her seat and used her semblance to start closing the distance between herself and the ape-like Grim. What follows is our actual opening fight for the volume between the newly christened Team Ranger and a pack of Beringals, led by an incredibly violent and powerful Alpha. Like last season, I'm not going to dwell too much on the choreography of fights that I have to invent myself, mostly because it saves time, but also because, unlike most other aspects of writing, this is one area where working with what the animators can accomplish is the most limiting. So instead, I'll give the broad strokes and intent behind the scene, and you can feel free to fill in the details as you see fit. So over the course of this fight, Ruby overexerts herself in trying to protect all of her friends simultaneously, exhausting herself quickly by overusing her semblance. This, combined with a harebrained scheme involving a tanker truck laden with gravity dust, ends with the Alpha Beringel, the train's engine, and the tracks going up in a giant anti-gravity fireball, ending the fight. The tracks in particular are damaged as feedback from the gravity dust overloaded the tracks going out a mile out of the town, causing the rails to literally explode from overpressure. Notably, during this fight, John's sword is broken, his shield is damaged, and his pack is torn open, letting Pyrrha's old broken sword and shield clatter to the ground. One last notable instance during this fight is when Nora is cornered. She reaches into her pouch for something that we can't see, but decides better of it when Ren swings around to save her. Once the battle is concluded, Ren watches the Alpha's remains disintegrate, leaving behind a heavy collection of bone. He surmises that this was an old Grim that had been biding its time to gather a pack and attack the town, mostly because Beringals are more prone to ambush hunting than frontline assaults. The train's conductor examines the damage and confirms that nothing is getting in or out of the station anytime soon. They suggest trying to load trains from outside the walls where the tracks are still intact, but the conductor shakes that idea off, as the amount of people they need to keep track of would make it too dangerous to organize and keep safe from the Grim. They're a port town, but not a very populated one. Even with 4 experienced huntmen in training and 5 on-duty huntsmen, there'd be a significant risk to the civilians that go out that far. RWBY apologizes for the damage and the man laughs, explaining that, "This is what insurance is for, kiddo!" He says that if they're planning on continuing to Mistral, it'd probably be best to find a way to Shion, which is the next closest station. It's a little far, but they can shelter up in the town of Tsubaki along the way. If they don't get eaten by Grimm, they could make the journey in just 2 or 3 days to catch the train coming from Mistral. He then excuses himself to go radio Mistral about the situation. The group discuss the options and ultimately agree to go to Shion, though they're not happy about it since being in 2 different towns will start to drain on their pooled money reserves, let alone the cost for light camping equipment like sleeping bags. John also feels suitably disarmed with the destruction of his sword and shield, though RWBY assures him that they can find a way to repair them when they get to Tsubaki or Shion. She even reassures him about paying for it since they can probably find a job while they're out at Tsubaki and they have a few days to buffer before the train gets to Shion. John nods in agreement, getting a little more pep in his step. As he walks away, RWBY looks back towards the carnage of the train yard and frowns. She looks down at Crescent Rose, closes her eyes, and takes a deep breath before putting it away and walking off with her friends. And with that done, we hit this season's intro. But since I don't have the resources to produce a new, better intro with a stronger song, I'll have to settle for being thankful to my newest patrons: Rudolph, Anthony Combs, Silvode, and Nighthunter11. Without you guys, this project would never have gotten off the ground, and I hope I meet your expectations. Remember, for $1 or more to my Patreon, you too can get a shoutout here in one of these videos, as well as gain access to the Team Frostbite Discord server, where I, as well as other RWBY fans and critics, can congregate for a fun and relaxing time. But enough of me shilling myself, on with the show! We open episode 2 8 months after the fall of Beacon. We find Weiss silently walking through her home like she did in the original episode 2, and on reflection, those shots were really great at establishing how lonely Weiss felt before attending Beacon. She arrives at a door where Klein is waiting. He opens it and announces her presence. She emerges into a gala where she moves to politely greet her guests and play the good hostess. The guests' voices begin to blur together, as do their appearances, melting away into nothing but colorful silhouettes to further emphasize that, even in a crowded room, Weiss is alone. This is only broken when Whitley is announced, standing out as the only unique figure amongst the crowd. Whitley approaches Weiss and shares a few polite words with the guests that she's chatting with. The guests move on, and Weiss, keeping her strained smile, questions if Whitley has grown since he seems taller. Whitley is a little smug and affirms that he's been the same height for months and suggests that she keep her eyes checked, adding that Winter saw the change immediately. Weiss is confused, asking, "Since when has Winter's opinion mattered to you?" Before he can respond, Jacques appears at the top of the stairs to the gala and conducts a speech, thanking everyone for being in attendance, especially at Legion Roundtable members Camilla and Sleet. He makes a brief jab at General Ironwood and member Chartreuse for not attending, a backhanded compliment of sorts, but is quick to move on to the goal of the gala, promoting unity in trying times. His speech fades into the background as we see Weiss and Whitley watching him. Weiss comments that Jacques doesn't even need them there for this, it's just more grandstanding for himself after all. Whitley supposes that it's to show family unity, but chucks that idea out the window himself, commenting that if Jacques really wanted to do that, he'd have dragged their mother away from her wine glasses and flower beds. He theorizes that maybe Jacques was hoping Weiss would sing for the crowd. He looks to her and asks if she would once Jacques' speech is over. She huffs and turns away, saying that if he was going to act as Jacques' messenger boy, he should have worn a uniform. Whitley feigns being wounded and asks when Weiss gained such an acerbic wit. He doesn't let her respond, instead insisting that she spent so much time cooped up in her room that he simply wanted to hear his sister's wonderful voice. Weiss appraises him briefly before commenting, "You seem different," and he responds, "Spend some time outside of your room, and I think you'll find more has changed than you think." After this, he walks away, leaving Weiss alone in the ocean of people. We cut to the actual ocean with Blake traveling by boat to Menagerie only 1 month after the fall of Beacon. We get Blake's conversation with the ship's captain, where he basically tries to defuse the walking ball of angst as a precaution against Grimm. After he goes away, instead of letting go of her ribbon, she catches wind of a man in a cloak stalking her from a distance. She corners the man in a short, somewhat comedic pursuit scene where she loses the man's tail only to turn it around on him. After holding a blade to his throat, the man is revealed to be Sun, who has been tailing Blake in the weeks following Beacon's collapse, including stowing away on the ship. Blake takes a sniff of the air and cringes, saying that it explains a lot. Instead of launching into a prolonged fight sequence, we're treated to a heart-to-heart between the two, where Blake gets to unload a bit of her pathos on the Sun. She first starts out scolding him for following her, but he defends this by pointing out that she was brutally injured, and since she's so stubborn, she could have easily gone off to fight the White Fang on her own by hitching a ride to Menagerie. She rejects his assumption that she's going to Menagerie to fight the White Fang. In fact, contrary to popular belief, the White Fang's central organization is in Mistral. Instead, she's just running. Sun asks what happened with Yang, as he only ever saw the aftermath. Blake chokes out Adam's name, but swallows down the rest of her words to prevent herself from crying. Sun is quick to assure that she doesn't need to tell him and that she can take her time, and she's grateful for this. She composes herself and explains that her old partner in the White Fang almost killed her and Yang, but most details she leaves vague. She explains that every single time she looks at Yang's stump while they were there in the hospital, she felt nothing but guilt, an unbearable crippling amount. Unable to stand it, she ran. Just ran away, booked a trip, and followed through. Even now, she's twisted with even more guilt over abandoning her friend, paralyzing herself between facing her guilt head-on or avoiding it and hoping she never has to. Sun very carefully asks what Blake is planning to do once she gets to Menagerie, to which she responds that she doesn't know. But she knows one thing, she's sick of hiding who she is. And with that, she removes her bow and tosses it into the water. She muses that it's at least one weight off her shoulder. Sun agrees and muses that it's what Blake needs to do. Remove the weights one by one, vowing to help her do it every step of the way. He wraps that saying that he's never been to Menagerie before, so he's excited, giving a his Journey to the East pun before we close on the scene. We skip forward to 8 months after Beacon's fall, where Yang is depressed and watching TV. The news updates discuss difficulties with repairing Vale's CCT since Atlas's dust embargo went into effect and communication with their engineering firms have been slow. On a different channel, we get reports that Huntsmen have made significant progress in reclaiming Beacon's campus as the older Grimm have largely been dealt with, though officials say it'll still be some time before it can be restored and reopened. Switching to one more channel, there's a discussion panel on the role the White Fang played in the attack at Beacon and how the now in custody former leader still insists that it was a rogue element responsible for the attack. Adam isn't mentioned by name, but a blurry image of him appears alongside a collection of White Fang troops, prompting Yang to turn off the TV. The rest of the scene is largely untouched as Tai arrives to the front door carrying a whole host of packages. He presents Yang with her new arm, one of the few items to make it of Atlas because it was sent by Ironwood as part of a program honoring all the students injured in protecting civilians during the fall. It's not the highest end model like the original show insisted, but a higher end model. I know that's basically potatoes, but it irks me that the last time that Ironwood interacted with her, she had inverted some kids' kneecaps during the tournament, so why she got special treatment kind of baffles me. Here, it's part of a larger program and it's not so advanced, so it's not super special awesome, just respecting her for the effort she put in standing her ground like she did and rewarding her for that determination. Anyway, Tai suggests that if she wants to get used to her arm, he could squeeze her in with his rehab classes, mentioning Neptune would probably be happy to have a friend along for the last stretch. Yang responds as apathetically as she did to the original and retreats to her bedroom. We cut to the montage of her doing her chores, and this is untouched save for the PTSD episode where she drops her glass. Now I'm not changing the trigger or the effect, those are perfectly fine as I've now learned researching PTSD a little more. Instead, what I'm changing is Tai's role in this scene, as when Yang snaps out of her Adam hallucination, Tai is standing in front of her where Adam had been. He's looking at her with concern and leaning forward, unsure of how to help her. With her faculties returned, she whispers, "Damn it," and slams her hand down on the counter, ending the episode. Episode 3 opens with a child's voice counting down from 10 for hide-and-seek tag. When he opens his eyes, we see he's a boy of about 9 or 10 with orange blonde hair and striking green eyes. He begins looking for his friend Aventine, who he calls Avi, and when he catches her, she runs, giggling all the way. The two run through a farm before passing a well, and a sound from within the well makes the boy stop. He stares at it, and we learn that his name is Remus when Avi calls after him, confused why he stopped chasing her. He shakes off the weird feeling he has towards the well and resumes chasing her, playing off his pause as a trick to get her to slow down. They run off, but the camera lingers on the well and the slowly increasing bass overtaking the soundscape. When it reaches its crescendo, the screen goes black and we cut to our opening credits. Returning from the opener, we get the original events of Volume 4, Episode 1, The Next Step, almost completely untouched. Added are a few lines of concern from John near the beginning of the scene, worrying about Ruby going off on her own to scout out their target. Ren responds that Ruby knows how to handle herself, though John expresses doubt just before Ruby emerges from the tree line being chased by the Geist. Now there's a number of issues with this fight that need to be fixed in choreography I'm not going to touch, but the changes that need to be made thematically are notable. For one, it's still John who takes command during the fight, suggesting they delimb the Geist's body to get it to expose itself. Additionally, no one has upgraded their weapons yet, meaning Nora isn't using her weapons to get a jolt. Instead, she slams a small amount of electric dust into her body from her satchel, something that concerns Ren and physically pains her despite the fact that it gives them an edge over what is slowly becoming a difficult battle. All the same, Ruby and Nora still defeat the Grimm using a tag team maneuver, and finish it off with a well-placed sniper round that we actually get to see connect in a pretty cool camera through the bullet wound camera shot. We jump back to the village where Ruby and the crew are being rewarded for taking out the Geist, and there's an offhand mention of the 2 local huntsmen they have on hand. The Geist had managed to put them out of commission, thus leading to discussions of whether to relocate the village or get outside help like Team Ranger. After the relatively untouched pleasantries, we move on to the blacksmith where John's sword and shield have been repaired using steel from Pyrrha's own sword and shield. The man even throws in a collapsible helm for John since he had enough material left over between the 2 weapon sets and decided to get creative with it. Now with John's new outfit set up, we don't get that weird pumpkin Pete scene where Ruby's head inflates to fill the room. Instead, we get a moment of John looking forlornly at the weapon and mumbling about not deserving it. Ren reassures him that Pyrrha would probably have preferred her weapons still get used, and in that way John is keeping her alive. John sighs and turns to Ruby, asking her to remind him to thank her uncle for recovering Pyrrha's effects for them along with their spare gear. We get their little departure talk outside of the blacksmiths and the dispute over who's in charge of the map, and the wide shot that pulls up to the sky as their argument fades out, ending episode 3. Episode 4 opens quite literally with a set of double doors, 1 month after the fall of Beacon. Adam strolls through the doors to a throne room that has obviously seen better days, with White Fang soldiers picking up pieces of debris, mopping up stray specks of blood, and posting White Fang banners across the walls. In the middle of this room is Sienna Khan, with her back to Adam observing the work being done by her subordinates. Without him saying a word, she begins to appraise the building out loud, commenting how it was owned by a black market slave trader and had only just been liberated in the name of the cause. She muses how ironic it is that a place once so foul would become the perfect staging ground for a new era of the White Fang. Adam asks where Onryo is, referring to Kin Onryo who led the White Fang after Gira. Sienna turns to him and snarls that Onryo has been deposed and arrested for the atrocities committed in Vale. It was all she could do to save the White Fang from international retribution on an unprecedented scale, and now their reputation has to be completely rejuvenated from the ground up. She finally turns to look at Adam, insisting that he should be arrested for his role in things too. She demands to see the lieutenant since she's been locked out of Onryu's files and she wants to hear what his orders were directly from him. Adam, quickly sensing the gravity of his position, lies, saying the lieutenant was killed during the attack at Beacon and there was no time to collect his things. He tells a sliver of truth, that there was a deal made with humans that the lieutenant found beneficial to their aims, but it ultimately backfired when he was stabbed in the back in the field. Adam barely had time to retreat with the few troops that had been captured or killed. Sienna narrows her eyes at Adam and wonders aloud how strange it was for the lieutenant to make such a decision. He was always more of a follower than a leader, and his relationship with Adam and Blake was always close. He'd always defer to Adam's command if it ever came to it. Adam shrugs the veiled accusation off, saying that having a command of his own in Vale gave the lieutenant a much-needed backbone, even if it ended up costing him his life. Sienna continues to scrutinize Adam before brushing the subject aside, telling him he's been demoted immediately for going along with such an abhorrent plan, and he's lucky he's popular enough among the troops, else she'd have him arrested alongside Onryu. Adam grits his teeth and bends to the demotion, though visibly stiff over it. As he's leaving, she tells him to be careful to not make messes he can't clean up. Outside the throne room is Ilya leaning against a wall, waiting to mock Adam upon his exit. She jibes at his demotion and wonders aloud how Blake will react, seeing him hang his head like a slapped puppy. Adam actually growls at this, but she persists, wondering where Blake is actually since she hasn't replied to any of Ilya's messages in a couple of months. Adam's grimace turns into a cruel smile as he tells Ilya that Blake has defected and actually sided with the humans during the Battle of Beacon. Ilya laughs it off as a joke, but when Adam continues just staring at her, her laughter dies down and shock begins to grow on her face. She begins to stutter that he's lying to her, because Blake would never join them. She hates them just as much as they did, that Blake would never leave them behind. Adam just turns around and keeps walking away, chuckling bitterly that he thought the same thing, ending the scene. We jump to Kuokuana and Menagerie where Blake and Sun have arrived by boat and are exiting into the market square. Sun remarks how few people there seem to be. He expected the place to be absolutely packed from what livable land there is to work with. Blake explains that it's the hot season, so most people are going to be spending their time in the shade and not out and about unless they need something specific. Sun comments the heat isn't that bad, which is true for a man that grew up in the desert. In fact, for him this weather is perfectly pleasant. Blake agrees that it's pretty nice this time of year, but monsoon season can get nasty and there's not much people can do other than hunker down and hope their homes don't get swept away. She bitterly remarks that Menagerie is just one step away from a tropical paradise, kept at bay by bad weather in the spring and an inhospitable wasteland beyond the walls. They arrive at a hill overlooking most of the city, which is comprised of interconnected slum-like housing and occasionally broken up by larger, wealthier, more private homes. Blake, seeing her house, remarks that her parents must have added that expansion they wanted as it looks bigger than she remembers. At least, she still hopes it's her home. It's been years since she's seen her family. Sun asks which house she's referring to, and she points him to arguably the biggest house on the entire city. Sun just stares agape at her, asking, "Wait, what?" before she drags him off to the front door. When they go to the door, warm reunions ensue as they did before, and we swap over to tea time with the Belladonnas. This is basically the same scene, just with a few more details tacked on. For example, Callie explains that she was relieved to see Blake fighting for Beacon in the tournament, the first time that she'd seen her daughter in years, and she was alive and well, but she was equally as scared when the Fee died in the middle of the battle. They've only gotten scattered reports about what happened since the tower in Vale went down, and none of it sounds particularly good. The rest of the conversation proceeds as normal. Then Fennec and Corsic arrive, and their conversation varies in only two places. When it's mentioned Gira is the new chieftain of Menagerie, and when they offer their explanation for the events at Beacon. With the former, Blake reacts with shock, and Gira explains that it was a very recent appointment overshadowed by hype over the Vital Festival tournament outside of Menagerie. With regards to the latter, Fennec and Corsic explain that the Vale branch were operating as a rogue faction with tacit permission from Kin on Ryu. Now that he's in jail and the Vale branch is under the firm control of Sienna Khan, the brothers came seeking Gira's help in rehabilitating the name of the White Fang before long-lasting damage can be done. When Blake objects, detailing what the Fang did while in Vale, the brothers are obviously apologetic, and offer to present what official documents they have on the matter to Gira for consideration at the next major government meeting. Gira, skeptic, said that he'll entertain their evidence, but if they're looking for an endorsement, they better have something to impress him. They give their parting remarks to Blake, take jibes that she stopped fighting, Blake gets indignant that she hasn't stopped fighting, and they give an open invitation for her to return, sans Ilya remark. Then they leave. Sun gives his frank appraisement of them, Gira gives his frank appraisement of Sun, and the episode ends with the door closing on the camera. And we'll leave it there for today. I'd like to thank everyone for watching this first installment, and I hope you'll return when I release the next one, hopefully within some kind of timely fashion. Remember, if you like my take on RWBY, you should subscribe to the channel, ring that bell, and pass this video series on to any friends you may think might like it. And of course, don't forget to follow me on my Patreon. For $1 or more, you get access to the Team Frostbite Discord server, The Tundra, where I, as well as other YouTubers such as FatmanFalling and Dashy Lee, interact with our followers on the regular. Remember to also follow me on Twitter for the newest updates to my channel and all the content I'll be covering going forward. One more note, I do have a book. Forged Within Flames, an interconnected series of short stories available now in digital and print on Amazon. Please give it a look if you ever feel up to it. But that's enough for now. I'll catch you all in the next episode.